It's very good we're meeting ourselves and catching up. Just a few more seconds to do that while we begin. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, please, can we get seated? We'll start in earnest. Can we get seated, please? Thank you. We'll have a session to catch up a lot. All right, please, can we all rise for the national anthem, the first stanza of the national anthem? Thank you. May we be seated. So I really want to welcome each and everyone seated in this hall to this very special occasion, the launch of the State of Democracy in Nigeria Performance Report. And it's good to have each and every one of us seated.
Leaders of democratic institutions in our midst, partners, civil society and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen of the press, and everyone, I want to welcome you today. It is with great honor and deep pride that I welcome you all to this official launch of the State of Democracy in Nigeria 2025 report. The first of its kind, assessment of democratic practice across Nigerian 36 states. Today is not simply the presentation of a report. It is the unveiling of a new evidence-based instrument for understanding how democracy is functioning, where citizens experience governance most directly, and that is at the state level. For too long, Nigerian democratic conversation has been dominated by national level analysis. That is presidential election, federal institutions, and national political development. Why these remain important? They do not tell the full story. Democracy is also lived in the states, in how citizens participate, how inclusive government is, how state institutions perform, how legislatures exercise oversight function, and how freely citizens, civil society, and the media can engage without fear or restriction. This is why Kimpact Development Initiative developed the Democracy Performance Index. The index assesses democratic performance across the four major dimensions, namely the electoral participation, political inclusion, democratic institution effectiveness, and civil liberty and civic space. These four dimensions allow us to go beyond whether democratic structure exists and ask whether they are producing accountability, inclusion, effective institution, and civic freedom. At KDI, we are particularly proud that this report is grounded in a robust and credible methodology. It combines official institutional records with citizens and stakeholder perspective, covering all the 36 states, over 200 institutional checklists, over 7,000 citizen responses, aside from over 90 stakeholders engaged for the validation process across the 6 geopolitical zones. The data were cleaned, validated, standardized, and triangulated before scoring. This gives us confidence that the findings are not based on assumption, sentiment, or political preference, but on evidence and structured analytical process. The findings we are launching today are both revealing and thought-provoking. They show that democracy is active across Nigerian states, but is not yet consolidating. Institutions exist, elections are held, citizens participate, but these do not always translate into accountable governance, inclusive representation, or protected civic freedom. The report also shows that no state currently reached the high democratic performance zone, while only 6 states fall within the moderate performance band. But let me emphasize this clearly. This report is not designed to name and shame. It is designed to diagnose, guide, and strengthen. It provides governors, state assemblies, electoral bodies, civil society, development partners, media, and citizens with practical evidence on where democracy is working, where it is constrained, and where reform can have greater impact. Today, we at KDI, we invite you to engage with this report not as final verdict, but as a reform tool. The real value of this work will not be measured only by the quality of the publication, but by how its findings are used to improve governance, strengthen institutions, deepen inclusion, protect civic space, and rebuild citizen trust. On behalf of board management and the entire team at KDI, I want to express our sincere appreciation to everyone who contributed to this historic work. Our researcher, field team, validators, peer reviewers, partners, and respondents across the country. This is a proud moment for us at KDI, but more importantly, it's a contribution to Nigeria's democratic future. As we launch this report today, I invite us all to look beyond the rankings and ask more important questions. What must we do differently to make democracy more meaningful, more inclusive, and more accountable at the state level? Once again, I welcome you to this important launch. Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for the Executive Director of KDI, Mr. Duklo. He has said it all. And at this point, we'll go into the goodwill messages. And to kick that rolling, we have the Director General Conference of Speakers of State Legislators in Nigeria, Mr. Busari Sarafidin. Please, a round of applause as he comes up. Please, let's keep clapping till he comes up.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Speaker of the Kano State House of Assembly, Right Honorable Jubril Ismail of Agore, ably represented here at this event by Dr. Idris Salisu Rogo. May I request to allow me to please stand on the already established protocol. Thank you very much for that. On behalf of the Conference of Speakers of State Legislatures of Nigeria, I warmly congratulate the Kimpact Development Initiative, KDI, on the convening of this important dialogue and public launch of the State of Democracy in Nigeria, DIN report. This report comes at a very critical time for our democracy. From our vantage point at the Conference of Speakers, where we work closely with the leadership across state legislatures, we see firsthand the growing expectations of citizens and the interesting demand for institutions to be more responsive, transparent, and accountable. What makes the DIN report particularly valuable is its practical relevance by providing a clear data-driven picture of how democratic governance is evolving across the states. It equips policymakers, legislators, and stakeholders with the kind of evidence needed to support informed decision-making and meaningful reform. As a conference, our role is to support and strengthen the capacity of state legislatures to effectively carry out their constitutional responsibilities. And in doing so, we are constantly seeking credible tools and insights that we can enhance institutional performance and deepen democratic practice. The DIN report is one such tool. This dialogue, therefore, is more than a gathering. It is a platform for reflection, learning, and collaboration. It offers an opportunity for stakeholders to engage constructively, share perspectives, and identify practical steps towards strengthening governance at the subnational level. I commend the leadership of KDI, especially the Executive Director, Mr. Bukola Idowu, and his team, for their sustained commitment to promoting accountable and inclusive governance in Nigeria. I'm confident that the discussions here today will be frank, insightful, and forward-looking, and that they will contribute meaningfully to the strengthening democratic institutions and rebuilding public trust. I wish you all a productive and impactful engagement. Thank you very much.
Please, another round of applause for our DG. Just coming after our DG is the Deputy Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, Omolara Akiyeye, for her goodwill message. Please, a round of applause for her as she comes up. We can do better.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to, still stand on existing or established protocols. I'd say good morning to all of you. And mine is just a goodwill, just to congratulate KDI for doing this. I know that some months back we did something, not like this, but like a needs assessment. And I know what it takes to do that. So congratulations to you. And I'm happy that that the Conference of Speakers is being represented here this morning. I mean, working at the National Assembly, I know it's a different ball game at the state level. So it will be quite interesting to see how this works and what findings that KDI came up with in this research that they have done. And having said that, I'd like to wish us fruitful deliberations and look forward to the discussions in this session. Thank you very much. Have a good morning.
Thank you so much, Makawo. Please give her another round of applause as she takes her seat. From our setup, you already know that we're here to have a dialogue. So we do have mics on your decks. And when we get to that session, you have to turn on your mic and make your contribution. And after you're done, you also switch it off. So to take this conversation to the next level, we'll be having our keynote speaker. But just before he comes up, I would like to read his citation, a very brief citation that we have. All right. So Professor Adetunji Ojo Ogunyemi, who is our keynote speaker on this occasion, is a Nigerian academic, a legal scholar, a historian, specializing in economic history, revenue law, legislative drafting, and security studies. He is a professor in the Department of History at Obafemi Awolowo University. He holds a master's degree and a PhD in history from the University of Lagos and Obafemi Awolowo University. His PhD research focused on federal budgets in Nigeria beginning from 1954 to 1999, reflecting his strong interest in public finance and governance. Professor Ogunyemi is also a solicitor and advocate of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, combining legal expertise with historic scholarship. He has received academic grants, including the Carnegie Conference Grant and the Conrad Stifton International Conference Grant. His professional profile reflects a blend of scholarship, legal practice, and policy-oriented research, making him a notable voice in Nigerian historical and legal studies. Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's have Professor Adetunji Ojo for his keynote address. Please, who can do better than that as he comes forward?
Thank you so much. Good morning. I bring you regards and words of congratulations from my Vice Chancellor, Simeon Bamire, Professor of Animal Sciences, and from my colleagues at the Faculty of Arts, Obafemi Awolowo University. Why are we gathered here? We are gathered here to debate, but first to examine and to see what Kimpact Development Initiative has done with respect to two things. One, definitions, and two, measurements. In our university work, we often do tests and measurements to do many things, chief of which is to clarify. Second, to also define and to make bold in great relief those things that previously may be hidden, either in meaning or in clarity. And if Kimpact Development Initiative has done this with respect to democracy in Nigeria, it must mean that it has succeeded in giving unto us, particularly practitioners of democratic development in Nigeria, legislators, citizens, CSOs, SO states, etc., etc. That instrument by which they may be able to explain either to the electorate or to the general public the extent of their domesticating democratic practices at the subnational level. This is a concern for democratic practice in Nigeria. And if we must be concerned about democratic practice in Nigeria, we should be able to clarify, define, measure, and test those things that make for democracy. Now, why do we have to define? Do definitions matter? Do they matter? For example, it will amaze us how many countries in the world claim to be democratic. It will amaze us. To the extent that by the time we begin to do our debate, shortly after I make this speech, it is either we are confused or convinced, depending upon what variable we are using, as to what democracy amounts to. For example, Britain and its democratic practice is as old as 1688, the Glorious Revolution, when the Britons decided to overthrow their own monarchy, sent it out of its rule, institutionalized democratic monarchical rule, also called constitutional monarchy, and made the parliament and its governance superior to monarchical control. The United States of America, having been influenced by France, 1789 revolution, started its own democracy by giving its people a constitution. That is more than 230 years ago. The same thing also in France, 1789, in that revolution. So, what makes for a democratic state? We must be able to define and know what makes for a democratic state. Let's give just 3 examples of states that are claiming to be democratic. Britain. That's number 1. 2, North Korea. And 3, China. In great relief, if we compare whatever happens and what has been happening since the Kim Il-sung's family that have been ruling in North Korea, and we say it is democratic, then it is either we are mischievous or we are confused as to what democracy amounts to. In North Korea, not voting, just not voting, or failing or refusing to vote is a crime. You will be punished by long years of imprisonment. Attempting to establish another political party apart from the Korean People's Party is a crime. Fielding any candidate apart from the candidate brought forward by the Korean People's Party is a crime. And the punishment can be as severe as life imprisonment. In Britain, and Britain practices multi-party democracy. To establish a new political party only requires that you register and that you have the conditions precedent to forming a party. So, how do we compare the circumstances of North Korea and that of Britain? Are these 2 countries democratic? It calls to question, therefore, that we must be able to define, to measure, and to be able to assess, for us to be able to determine what makes for democracy, let alone its performance. Certainly, we must come up with objective conditions, objective prerequisites to democratic practice that have been suggested elsewhere and which we shall look at now. A. Appadurai, that Indian author in the 1940s, brought out a work which he called Substance of Politics. He, together with Edmund Burke, are agreed as to the meaning or the definition of democracy. A form of government in which the 4 principles are respected. 1, the principle of popular sovereignty and popular rule. So if there is no popular sovereignty and popular rule in a country, that country is not democratic. Where leadership is dictated only by one single political party cannot claim to be democratic. In fact, it's an insult. 2, a country that has an independent, not neutral, an independent judiciary, because no judiciary can be neutral. An independent judiciary can lay claim to be a democratic state. 3, a democratic state must be that which has periodic elections, where elections can be predetermined, and its periodization known according to the laws of the land. And finally, where majority rule exists. These 4 conditions are the conditions precedent to a democratic system. If a country does not have these 4 conditions simultaneously, it falls flat in being called a democratic state. So, popular sovereignty, popular rule, majority rule, periodic elections and independent judiciary are critical to the establishment of a democratic state. That's definitional. Some people have even added a free press very recently. Shegun Johnson, professor of political science at the School of Oriental and African Studies, says a free press should be included as one of the conditions precedent to having a democratic system. So, democracy itself, if it can be as controversial, even in definition and in conceptual clarification as this, how much more the practice of that democracy? Even in its name, democracy, Fidel Castro also said that his country was democratic. Fidel Castro's Cuba claimed that his country was democratic. The Chinese say that their own democracy is that which allows for the dictatorship of the working class. I mean, just imagine the oxymoron that a democracy which ought to allow for freedom and not dictatorship is in China permitting for the dictatorship of the working class. So, that means there must be two types of democracies. One, a liberal democratic system, and two, an illiberal democratic system. So, if a democracy is said to be a liberal democratic system, what we must do is to measure the conditions precedent to that democratic system. And this is what KDI has done. By suggesting, by giving out, by revealing, by illuminating those conditions precedent by which a democratic system shall have to be measured, assessed, and tested. And it has done this by doing it at the subnational levels of the Nigerian democratic system, the states and the local government. Now, so how should a democratic state therefore be defined according to these measurements? We have already said that it should be by popular rule and sovereignty, political socialization, rule of law, or independent judiciary, periodic elections, and majority rule. So, what makes for the dividend of that kind of a democratic system? Nigerians are wont to say that democracy must have dividends. And what are the dividends of democracy? Some have mooted the idea to say that it must mean that it is a form of government that provides for the welfare of the people, and that it must do infrastructure, and that inflation must be low to such an extent that the disposable income of the ordinary Nigerian should be such that should be able to take him home, that his living wages must be such that it is above poverty level. But let me shock you, this is not correct. The dividends of non-democracy are not good roads. Oh no, they are not good environment. No, that's not correct. The dividends of democracy are that the rights of the citizen is respected, that government is constituted only by the will of the people, popular will. 3, that the judiciary that operates in such a state is free from interference from the executive and the legislature, therefore independent. And 4, that there is periodic rule, periodic elections. If you have these conditions in any country, it is democratic. If you say good roads, good water, economy, welfare, even dictatorships do that. Dictatorships achieve even better roads. The single most important civil engineering construction in Nigeria, the 3rd mainland bridge in Lagos, was done by the military, not the civilian. So when we speak of democracy, therefore, it is not therefore analogous to good governance. It does not mean because you have democracy, you are going to have good governance. Most of the countries in Africa that have democratic practices are among the worst governed countries in Africa. In fact, democracy in countries like Senegal and in Namibia has not liberated the people from poverty. No military rule has ever governed in Senegal since its independence. Yet, the people have continued to remain in real abject poverty. So, why has democracy not achieved economic growth for them? It means that economic development and growth is not a condition for democracy. What makes for democracy, therefore, are periodic elections, popular rule, popular sovereignty, majority rule, and an independent judiciary. Full stop. It is possible for a country that has a dictatorship to govern its people well. Perfectly possible. Can we have an example? Morocco is an absolute monarchy. King Mohammed VI governed the country. He just appointed his son as the head of the army. A 22-year-old son. Just yesterday. Just like that. No military training, no nothing. He said he's the head of the army. Absolute monarchy. But I tell you, Morocco is even far better governed than Spain. And the economy of the country is such that it relates to the people perfectly. Lesotho, the highest country in Africa, located in the peak. It is one of the highly governed countries, efficiently governed. And we have the Vatican City, a theocracy. It's not a democracy. It's not a monarchy. It's not a plutocracy. It's not an aristocracy. A theocracy. One of the best governed countries in the world. So, why is it that people always think that democracy should achieve economic growth? Why? It is a function of good governance, not necessarily democracy. Because you can be properly well governed in a country that is though aristocratic, but then relates to the welfare of the people. So what is the beauty of democracy? It is in just one thing. One, that the people live in liberty. Liberté, equality, and fraternity. The foundations established by the French Revolution in 1789 remains the most critical standard, canon, by which you measure democratic rule. Meaning that the continuous measurement, test, analysis, and definition of democracy as it evolves in our modern world is one of the most critical functions that any civil society can do for democracy in Africa. Now, obviously, granted that a good and thriving economy is great, allowing the citizens to pursue their economic and social welfare, but it is not a way to describe the dividends of democracy. Rather, it is a way to describe good government. Then, shouldn't government be analogous or even same as democracy? The answer is no. Good government does not necessarily mean it must be democratic. So, whereas democracy has the potential to give good government, only potential to give good government, its presence or practice does not necessarily result in good government. Surely not in Africa. Now, this means that good governance is not necessarily found in democracy, nor is it absent in any other form of government. Aristocracy, diarchy, monarchy, and even democracy or theocracy itself have been shown in historical terms to be able to achieve good governance in different parts of the world. Historical data from the Vatican City have shown that theocracy has anchored good governance in that city-state. Monarchy, and I dare say absolute monarchy in Morocco and Lesotho, have been shown to be utterly beneficial and good for the governance of the countries. While democratic rule in Bedel Bokassa's Central African Republic, Chad, and even Paul Biya's Cameroon have not just shown a pronouncement of an utterly illiberal credentials, but a woeful democratic foundations. So, in fact, the French poet Alexander Pope, in his magnum opus, his great work, titled An Essay on Man, published in 1774, said, "For the best forms of government, let fools contest." When you see people arguing on which form of government is best, he said, Pope advised that let that discussion belong to the remit of fools. Whatever is best administered is best. So if a group of people decide for themselves that this is the kind of government they want and it works for them, then it is the best. It does not really matter whether a system or form of government adopted by a people is democracy, or aristocracy, theocracy, or communism. What is critical to the life and limbs of a people is the efficiency and effectiveness of administering a state in the best interest of the majority of its citizens, both for their security and welfare. And you will see that the Nigerian government did not mince words when it was crafting the 1999 Constitution. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as altered. In section 14, subsection 2, paragraph B, it says that the security and welfare of the people shall be the primary responsibility of government. Meaning that if a government fails in these two, security and welfare, that government has failed indeed. It has actually failed indeed. What KDI has done in these analysis, measurements, and tests is to show those conditions by which we may measure whether a government is performing to the tune of that section 14 subsection 2 paragraph B or not. Hence, the credentials of most of the so-called democratic governments in Africa, at least, is such that they fall far below the standards of democracy. Now, what has KDI done in this analysis? It has done two things. One, to measure, and two, to subject the measurement to stakeholders' analysis. Through civil liberties and civic space, it has measured democracy at Nigeria's subnational level. Through democratic institutional effectiveness, it has measured democracy at the subnational level. And it has also done that through electoral participation and political inclusion. Meaning that if we say that Nigeria has democratic practice at the subnational level, at least, it must be able to relate with the civil liberties credentials. The civic space must be liberal, not illiberal. Two, democratic institutions must not just be effective, but must follow the law by which they are being set up. Then, electoral participation must not just be regular, but must be free, must be fair, must be transparent. And finally, political inclusion. Inclusion of even the least measured set of citizenry, the demographics of Nigeria, must be such that they are sufficient to guarantee the level of legitimacy that a democracy ought to have. Now, it did this by suggesting 4 measuring rods, 4 standards. One, whether these 4 conditions that were measured had existed in high performance, or in moderate performance, or in low performance, and finally in weak performance. It came to the conclusion, based upon data which is sourced from the institutions of government, from civil society organizations, from stakeholders in the legislative and executive bodies, and of course from the field, to the conclusion to say, when it comes to high performance of democracy in Nigeria, all the states scored 0. 0. 0 as in 0. No high performance. When it comes to low performance of democracy in Nigeria, we can only find it in 28 states, meaning 77.77%. Democracy is performed to the tune of 77.7% at a low level in Nigeria. And weak performance in 2 states. In fact, it mentioned them specifically. Rivers and Jigawa, 5.56%, which you will not say is a mark that you give a state a gold medal. So if the gold medal is to be awarded in Nigeria, it will be awarded to no state. No state. Why? Only in moderate performance of states do we have 6. Only 6 states are performing democracy in Nigeria moderately. Moderately being defined as averagely, in my own characterization. And there are just 6 of them. 4 of them in the south, 2 in the north. Only moderate performance of democracy in Nigeria. But are we not in a hurry? Where do we measure? Are we assuming that Nigerian democracy is such that it is matured for measurement? Democratic practice in the USA, 237 years old. In France, 237 years old. In Britain, since 1688, the Glorious Revolution. In Nigeria, since 1999. Barely 27 years. Now, is it correct to now begin? Are we not in a hurry? Or are we making haste slowly to define and measure democratic performance in Nigeria? I would rather subscribe to the latter one, which means we are making haste slowly because the conditions precedent to the performance of democracy in Nigeria are already set. By the time that we had the 1999 Constitution, Nigeria was not a medieval state, but a modern state. And what do you do to a modern state? You use modern tools to measure whether there is a democratic practice in it or not. Now, I draw your attention to these questions not because we assume that Nigeria is not democratic enough, but we know for sure that democracy is a process of achieving good governance and not a destination. There is no country in the world that has achieved the uppermost level of democracy to such an extent that improvements are no longer necessary. The USA even has amended its constitution severally. More than Nigeria has amended. We have only amended our constitution 5 times. We are only in the 50th alteration, even though 84 items have been altered. But we are only in the 50th alteration. America has altered its constitution severally. So, how can we achieve the final, most accurate measurement of democracy in Nigeria? It is to subject it to these 4 things that KDI have done. And at the risk of being repetitive, I insist that we should measure it again. And what are they? 1, whether democracy in Nigeria exists at the subnational level in such a way that we can say for sure that there is inclusiveness. 2, that we can say that there is civic space and civic liberty such that it involves the people. 3, that there is inclusion of even the least, most unrecognized part. And then 4, and finally, that democracy has anchored good governance. I conclude this speech by saying this to us as Democrats, or as illiberal Democrats. 1, that there is no perfect democracy anywhere. None. Absolutely none. And that when democracy work, they can only work by the instrumentality of institutions. Even though individuals too can be so abrasive as to make the institutions serve only their personal goals. The example of one man called Donald Trump in the United States of America it commends itself to us as to how a president, whoever thought that the president of the United States will not need the approval of the Congress to go to war, a major war. So the combativeness of your leadership and the capacity of the people to be able to permit, the inability of the people to be able to checkmate him can limit the extent to which democracy can be performed in any country. So what does it happen? How can we now prevent a situation in which we will slide to illiberal democracy, such as we have in North Korea or in China? 3 conditions. 1, eternal vigilance by CSOs. Eternal vigilance. CSOs, civil society organizations, they are not an appendage to governance anywhere. They are at the core of representative governance and at the core of democratic practice. There must be eternally vigilance. Salute to KDI in doing this. Salute to Plaque, Yihaga Africa, etc., etc. 2, activation of the office of the citizen. When citizens are just like a desicle about their governance, they don't care, or they wait to be mobilized to do what is right. Any kind of democracy can be foisted upon them. And then the 3rd and the last one, an independent judiciary. If the judiciary fails, refuses, and neglects to be independent, then democracy is already destroyed ab initio. The convergence of these three conditions, eternal vigilance of CSOs, and you will see that I did not mention that the legislature, national or state, should be involved. No. Legislators are people who are politicians. They play to the rule when it favors them, when in charge. They play against the rule when they are in the opposition. The noise you hear from the opposition most of the time are nothing but self-interest. Just self-interest. Who are those group of people that can protect democracy best? CSOs, eternal vigilance. 2, activation of the office of the citizen. The Kigba citizen. The citizens who take no nonsense. And 3, very important, independent judiciary. That is the intervention of the elite. The elite at the judicial level must intervene. The convergence of these three conditions protect democracy from being ruined. I thank you most sincerely.
From the rousing ovation, you could already know that Prof has done a great job. Please, let's give him another round of applause. Thank you so much, Prof, for your address. You have raised serious concerns. You have spoken about what really is a democracy and what we should look out for. Just to recap some of the principles you spoke about. You talk about the principles that must go simultaneously for us to kind of like ascertain that there is a democracy. You talked about popular rule and sovereignty. You spoke about independent judiciary. You spoke about majority rule must exist, and of course, periodic elections. So you made a lot of very thought-provoking comments. You asked us, why are we in a hurry? Is it time for us to measure Nigeria democracy? You made me want to probably relocate to Morocco, if possible, because quoting the Constitution, I don't think my security and welfare is guaranteed, but I'm hopeful. But most importantly, you gave us safeguards, and I think that is what is most important for this conversation, and the next steps will be taken from here. Things that will protect our democracy. You spoke about an independent judiciary. We have had issues around status quo ante bellum. We have also had many issues around the communication of judiciary, and it gives us grave concerns. You spoke about internal vigilance of CSO, which is one of the role I know KDI also play. And of course, the need to activate the office of the citizens. I think these are three important notes that we should take as we take a deep dive into this conversation around democracy. Please, once again, can we give Prof a round of applause? So while the conversation was ongoing, we had some other important dignitaries join us. We had the Director of News and Politics Editor at Arise News, Mr. Somna Shagari Sambo, join us. Please, a round of applause for him. Thank you, sir. You're welcome. He's also a discussant at this engagement. We do also have in our midst Barrister Frank Tete. He's a human rights lawyer. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And to take us further, we'll be giving about 5 minutes to 7 for our Executive Director to please come back again and speak to these findings. What have KDI found? So, sir, please can you come forward? Let's give him a round of applause for the Executive Director, KDI, for this few minutes before going. Okay, you do it from there? Great. Let's start from there then.
Thank you very much. I want to thank every one of us for coming, and from now the conversation is going to continue from here. So, and then except when we want to update. And for us, we also want every one of us to contribute. So at some point, the floor will be open and then you'll be able to speak from your table, wherever you are. Yes, today, for a lot of time, I think for months, we've been going around the 36 states, trying to assess how strong democracy is at the subnational level. Like I said in my address, basically most times our conversation has been most at times on focusing on the national level. How strong our National Assembly is, how strong the executive is, how strong our national judiciary is. But at the same time, we've forgotten that we are replicating what is at the national level, at the state level. At every state level, we also have the three arms of government at the state level. So how strong are they? The legislative house at the state level, the executive, and then also the judiciary. So for us, the Democracy Performance Index that KDI came up with now assesses how democracy functions in practice at the state level. Now, I hope all is well. I hereby declare status quo ante level. So go back to the state of peace. Thank you. Okay, so the Democracy Performance Index is developed and to assess, like I said, how democracy performs in practice. But let me quickly say that for us, let me quickly take you through the journey. For us, this is one of the new estates in Nigeria. But we have seen other institutions outside the country, international bodies assessing how democracy are in various countries. You look at the Freedom House reports, you look at the Civicus, you look at a whole lot of them. But most importantly, what we want to do is to see how do we customize this methodology and everything to the peculiarities of the Nigerian state, most especially at the state level. So this was developed and 36 states were measured. FCT was not measured. And the reason we did not measure FCT because the democratic institutions in FCT are national in nature. The National Assembly, for instance, make law for the FCT and the rest. So that is why we didn't look into that. And then, the first thing we did was to bring people together to do what we call methodology workshop, to come up with the methodology. How do we adapt the internationally recognized methodology and then the one we develop? How do we adapt it to Nigeria peculiarity? So what we have done was to bring people together to look at that methodology that we have looked at with academic, civil society, media, the entire organs of the country, of any nation. We put them together to develop and adapt the methodology. At the end of the day, we have close to like about 16, let me say like about 16 indicators to assess. But for clarity and because this is the first, at the end of the day, from that methodology workshop, we are able to limit them to 4. And these are what we assess. Electoral participation, which is the first one that we assess. And under the electoral participation, we look at the participation in terms of the voter turnout, PVC collected, most especially focus on the election conducted at the state level, which is the CIEC conducted. So not the one the INEC conducted. So we look at the participation. Then we look at the social and political inclusion, which talks about the representation across gender, across age, grade, and the rest. Then the second thing we look at is the political inclusion, which now talk about the power of the executive, at least that is the barest minimum, the power of the executive to for appointing position that look how inclusive is your government like. So most especially commissioners, SSA, how many of them are young people, how many of them are women, how many of them are also with disability. Because we also want to assess that inclusion. If we agree that democracy is about inclusion, most especially people, the popular definition, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, it has to be inclusive. So we look at that. The third thing we measured was the democratic institutional effectiveness. Those institutions, how effective are they? So we look at the legislative activities and functionality, we look at the separation of power in practice, in terms of oversight at how strong are the state legislative houses, we look at the fiscal autonomy, local government, autonomy of the local government, and then we look at transparency. And then the last thing we look at is the civic liberty and the civic space across the 36 states. You will recall that during the keynote address of Professor Obiemi, he also talked about the most important aspect is the popular group, which means the people. But most importantly, we assess the freedom of association and assembly there, civil society operational space. How easy is it for civil society to operate within the state? And then the freedom of expression. We look at the media freedom, and then the political representation of the political availability and accessibility of the electoral legal framework for people. So now these are the four major dimensions we look at. Now I have said we went to the 36 states. Now checklist was divided institution to get information from 6 key institutions at the state level, and so letter was sent to them. We sent the request for information across to them, and those institutions will see the state INEC to provide, because we also assess the state governorship election that relates directly to the people. Though it's being conducted by INEC, but they are choosing their own governor. We are not assessing how they chose the president. So we look at that. We look at institutions like INEC, SIEC, State House of Assembly report, then media archive, and then we went to the government website. Then most especially, most states, we went to the the Ministry of Bureau of Statistics in some of the states to get this information. So at the end of the day, 216 institution checklist were retrieved, we spoke, and then over 7,000, to be specific, 7,128 citizens also responded to the questionnaire and then the checklist too. So at the end of the day, we went into what we call the weighting measure to actually put weight on those four dimensions, and eventually 30%, for instance, civic liberty, which is called 30%, democratic institutional effectiveness, 30% too, and then electoral participation, and then political inclusion, 20% respectively. But if you look at this, we have election, but how strong is our institution after the election? That suggests why some of them are not rated at the same, on the same performance. So let me quickly go to our rating. At the end of the day, we have a rating mechanism, and then we have to classify that. Now, by the time we assess everything, you now have the scores. Now, stage between 0 to 39, let's just say 40, less than that. weak in performance. And then between 40 to 59 or 60, less than 60, are low or in terms of poor performance. And then we also look at moderate performance, which is between 60 to 79, less than 80, moderate performance of the state. Then in terms of the grading, we look at the between 80 to 100. If a state gets into that particular level, you are able to get high performance. So the key question for me is that what these have done. And after we have done this, so what we did was to now travel with this data. After analyzing, cleaning, triangulating and everything, we went to the 6th geopolitical zone to do what we call validation exercise. People, all the people we got people at the 36 state in terms of that validation from places to places. At the end of the day, we also subject this to peer review. Remember, we gathered in a city called Ancient City of Ibadan to do another layer to look at that peer review. And then the last set of what we did before we put it out was to also subject it to international peer review to say, look, people outside the country, you will see the name in the report. You don't have any stake. Look at this objectively. Check this strength of this methodology and what we have done. So at the end of the day, we came up with what we came with. So I will just present to us, number one, the national finding, which is the overall finding, how the map look like, and then I will also present to us how the map look like in those 4 categories, and then each of the states also have their own reports. But I will not be going to the report of each of the states. We still want to close at the time stated on the agenda. So I will just stop, but we will get the rest in the report. But the most important thing for us is this. The key question is not which state is performing better. The most important question is what can each state do better. So let's look at what the outlook is for the entire state. It could be discouraging, but this is entirely what we find out across the 4 dimensions. If you recollect, black means weak, in fact, critical. Democratic practices within that state. The red means it's low in poor performance. The amber, which yellow, shows moderate performance. The green, unfortunately, based on data and evidence, we could not classify any state in Nigeria as performing high in democratic practices across the four dimensions. Again, the dimension is electoral participation, political inclusion, democratic, institutional effectiveness, and civil liberty and civic space. So this is exactly what this shows us. It shows us that Oyo State, Osun State, and I think Professor mentioned this during his presentation, 4 states in the south, and then 2 in the north, Oyo State in the south, Osun State, Ekiti, and Ondo are performing moderately, and then you have Nasarawa and Yobe performing moderately at the northern hemisphere, and that is what the situation is in Nigeria today. But the truth of the matter is that when we did this, eventually we saw another report by Freedom House that categorized Nigeria. They did not even assess the 36 states, but they classified Nigeria as authoritarian democracy. It shows that we have more work to do. However, to answer Prof, are we in a hurry? I think we should be in a hurry so that we should not get into North Korea's system of democracy, where at the end of the day we will only have one candidate in an election, and it will be a criminal offense to sponsor another candidate. I don't think we want to slide into that. But this is what the data is saying. But let me show you the ranking in terms of the score, each of the states scored. And this is what each of the states scored. I think Oyo State scored 70% at the end, and then followed by Yobe, followed by Ekiti State, and followed by Nasarawa, Ondo, and Osun. So this is what the ranking looks like. Of course, you're going to get this in the report. But let's look at the last two performing, these two states that is Jigawa and Rivers State. It looks like democratic institutions and democratic practices looking like do not exist in Rivers State. And this is something we have all hands need to be on there. So let me quickly go to how the map look at it, because we also assess independently. And let me say this before we go to it. Now, the first thing I showed you is the average score, weighted average score of the 4 dimensions. So when you put the 4 dimensions together, and this is what you have. But again, we try to assess each of the dimensions. So what it shows us, what the data shows us is that there are states that perform better in one dimension and not in the other dimension. It also shows states have strength in one area and more than one area. And that is what. So let's go to what the map look like in electoral participation. Electoral participation. For instance, this is what this map look like in electoral participation. The quality of the participation of people in the state election and the local government elections. So this is what it looks like. So the data is showing no state reaches the high participation matrix. 22 states, which is like about 61%, fall within the moderate participation, which is the yellow color you are seeing. There are only 13 states record low electoral participation, and 1 state fall between weak and poor, and that is the black one you are seeing there. Don't let me mention the states, but you know where that state is there. Okay, so this is what electoral map look like, and I think at some point we will interrogate this further. Now, this look like this because while we were getting this data, our numerators across the state, we got information from the states here, we wrote to them, they responded officially, we used their own data to assess this. What we discover is that if, let me use INEC at the state level, I'm not using the national INEC, but let me use INEC at the state level. If INEC at the state level is performing at 70%, SIEC at the state level is performing less than 30%. And that shows the level of SIEC performance at the state level. In fact, if you read the report, you'll now begin to see some of the things we saw is that when you ask some of the SIEC, you find out that on the average 18 political parties, just to say this data, this report we are presenting today it covers 2 years, 2024 to 2025. So our intention is to assess every 2 years, but this is for 2024 to 2025. But when you look at between 2024 to 2025, when you look at the election conducted by SIEC, and according to the data they presented and they gave us, in some states only one party participated in that election. The rest boycott. In fact, we have some states that this report we got from the SIEC is, in fact, in some states there is no data. They don't even have the vote share of the winner. They don't even have it at the SIEC level. They just tell you this party won. By what vote? They don't have it. What is the turnout? They don't have it. And that is the reality of what we have at the CX level. And I think we need to begin to look at this. Why we look at INEC at the national, we need to begin to look at what we have here. So let's go to, if you want to see the score, and that electoral participation, the score is also there. I think you can quickly show us the score, if you have it. But okay, so this is what the scores look like. Is still Oyo leading them. Then you have Enugu did well at the electoral participation, followed by Kaduna State. Then Plateau. Interestingly, these four states, in terms of their CX, the effectiveness of their CX, also very commendable. Then let's quickly go, and I know I need to round up now. Go to political inclusion. Political inclusion, this is the situation we find ourselves in political inclusion. And political inclusion is the weakest dimension in this index across all states, which talks about representation of women, youth, and persons with disability. Representation of women, youth, persons with disability in not only at the State House of Assembly, but even in appointing position by the government. So if you go deeper, I think maybe when we get to that place, I'll just show you. You see the data of women at the State House of Assembly, women in commissionership position or appointing SSA, local government, and all those stuff. So, but this is what it shows all that all 36 states basically on political inclusion fall below acceptable inclusion standard. It also shows that 14 states which fall within weak, which is the black one we see in terms of inclusion, and then 22 states also fall within low, which is the red we see. All right, let's go to democratic institutional effectiveness. And with this, state institutions are represented, the degree at which state institutions are present and operational, but their effectiveness, one of the things we have seen is that we are measuring the effectiveness, how they are delivering those institutions, state houses of assembly, and other institutions. We look at oversight, transparency, and the rest. For instance, budget and things like that. So this is what this state is looking like. So you can see why Oyo State did well. You find out that under this institutional performance, it has moved to red. And you look at those people that did well in political inclusion, but institutions are. So what it shows us is that there are strengths, there are areas that we need intervention, that we need to look at. And lastly, civic liberty. Civic liberty, in terms of how free freedom of association, speech, media to be able to operate, in terms of using state security apparatus. How free is that space? This is what we have here. Interestingly, we only have 6 states that perform very well here. It shows the civic space in that state, in those states are functioning. You have Oyo, Ekiti, Ondo, Edo, Abia, and Benue states. And this shows that that civic space is open. Alright, just to show you, this is the overall national outlook, but in the report, each state have their own report, recommendation, and deeper thing we have presented. But just let me show you, before I hand over to Kimberly that we moderate this conversation, what the dashboard look like for each of the states. Can you just give me just one state? Let's look at how the dashboard look like. Okay, so this is Oyo State, for instance. When you look at it, rank number 1 according to that. But when you look at the electoral participation and the rest, you see that. But if you come to the right hand side, you see the data. Governorship turnout 26%. Then we measure the decline. Local government turnout. The number of times the assembly sat. The representation in the what is it called? Representation inclusion. They have, as at the time this was worked on, they only have 4 women out of 18 commissioners. They have 1 youth out of the 18 commissioners. No person with disability. And then in terms of other appointments, you'll find them. But this is just to provide you what it looked like. Please, can you go forward? Let me look at any state with any institutional data. Oyo doesn't. So interestingly, Oyo, if you see the institutional data here, it says number of cities, no data. They don't have the data of the numbers at which the state assembly starts. Let's go to other states that were able to provide that. Go. Okay. This is, don't let us use this. This is a bit bad, but what this means is this state sat, and this was collected from the clerk. This state sat 25 days out of 181 days. And this is some of the data we present. But in a nutshell, okay, look at this state, Ebonyi. Ebonyi sat, the state House of Assembly sat 105 days out of 181. There are states that you find here insecurity, you don't allow them to see. There are some states looking for the data, you find it difficult. Just to mention a bit of difficulty we also have in getting the data. There are some states, the clerk will tell you cannot get this data. They are renovating the the state House of Assembly. I don't have access to it, and the rest. But in such instances, we have to rely on some other institutional data. We also look at how accessible, how public are the state budget for citizens to engage on their website. We also public account. Thank you. We also look at that. You see a detailed report on that. We spend a lot of months to put all this together. But for me, this is what the situation looks like in Nigeria today. Like I said, it is not to name and shame. It is to say, what do we need to be doing differently? What should we be focusing on? And intervention at the state level, we may need to go back to the state level and do more intervention. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Please let's appreciate it. That was quite detailed, and it gives giving context to the panel conversation that we're going to have, so that when we start to ask the question, you know where it's coming from. My name is Kimberly Wanchiko. I'm a broadcast journalist with Real Broadcasting Network, and I'm honored to be moderating this panel. The panel is actually diverse. When I was looking at the report Bukola was presenting, I knew when Paul was speaking, I was stunned by it. But I was even more shocked that Prof was wowing. He was even shocked by the revelation that is available. So it tells you how bad it is. And I know some of you must have checked your states to see the performance level. Not that he was asking, but I thought Lagos would have done better. I say, I'm sorry, it's Nigeria, you get shocked every day. So we'll be interrogating further, and diverse panelists, even though I've been told to go beyond the list that I have. So I might as well just throw questions to other panelists in the room to just get their perspective of the report that's been presented. But I'll take it up from where the DG of KDI left off, and to find out, what informed the need for this at this juncture? It's something that a lot of people want to know. We already get an idea of what the Democratic Performance Index is, why it is important to develop this tool at this time in our democratic journey. is what I want to hear from you.
Thank you. Like I said, I think for us as an institution, we need to begin to look at, as KDI, what we think is that we need to begin to look at how strong each of these states is. If you look at the direction of the present administration, the moment you start talking to people at the center, they will tell you, go to the states, they have more money now. Go to the states, they have more money now. And that tells you something that they said, look, go to the states. And truly, let's look at it. If governance is functioning at the local government level, at the state level, then the functionality of governance at the state level, at the local government level, somehow is going to accumulate to the national governance rating. And we feel like attention has been too much at the national. And we have seen commendable measure of progress. For instance, you look at INEC, look at if you look at the election conducted by INEC, as imperfect as it is, CN election cannot stand beside that. So that tells you we need to vote. And if you are a federating state, we believe that we should be strengthening the subnational level. If we are practicing federalism, then we should be strengthening our subnational level and see how we can get more power and look at that. And then lastly, just to say, among many other things, is to also say, look, how are we assessing ourselves based on foreign rating? Where is our own rating? Where is our own concept? Putting together the peculiarity of our country. There are some things we saw there that we understand that no, this is normal. But somebody administering this from outside the country will not understand those peculiarities. And I think we need to begin to embrace this. A lot of work has been done, but it also shows, we also look at it and look, what about intervention? Donor agencies, international community may want to do some intervention. We should be able to tailor our intervention, even as civil society, to areas, what is needed, not one size fits all. And just because there are states here that need institutional strength, and there are states that we need to do a lot around their civic space. So we feel that all these nuances, peculiarity need to be put in place, and then we have to go out for months, over 6 months, to begin to look at this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For giving how policy is doing, they give credence to the group that are calling for INEC, even though they are perceived as also performing below, average. Some people are saying maybe INEC should take over the state electoral. I don't think that's going to fix that anyway, but we'll get to that in a minute. And the next set of questions will go to at least 3 gentlemen. I'll stand the room, and I know they are here. Barrister Frank Tete is here with us. Dr. Amechi Anagwe, I see you, and Mr. Somna Sando is also here. So let's look at the relevance of this tool that's been presented, really. How relevant is the tool, like the Democracy Performance Index, to our democratic institution, and where do you see its strongest value? I'm going to start with you, Barrister Tete.
Thank you, Kimberly. Well, I will recognize external problems like it. I was very ill, but I know what it is to disappoint, and I had to make my way here against all odds. A very important question you have mentioned, you have asked. First, I don't know how much time I have to make this point.
2 minutes or less.
Well, you know, democracy is in a decline on the African continent. It's not a very popular form of government, but for us here in Nigeria, it's a legal thing. Our constitution mandates us to practice democracy. I'm sure we must invite that. Particularly Section 14 of the Constitution says our country must be governed according to the principles, those are the words of the Constitution, according to the principles of democracy. So what this study has done is to dispel the notions that are common and general, often foreign, on the continent, but we still must congratulate ourselves that we're practicing democracy after all of these ups and downs. The verdict of democracy on the continent and on our country has been foreign. What this study has done is to localize our understanding, our perception, and to pass a verdict, which is even worse than the foreign perception. And that makes it very risky. Means that we have been the people that have been managing quite a lot. The other aspect of the question is how relevant it is. You see, because it is state-based, and that's the beautiful, peculiar thing about this study. I can't thank KDI enough for this. It shows that it's a thinking organization. You don't have to always, do things the way it was to be done. Because when you are fortunate to get donor funding, you simply do things that the donor expects. But when you actually go take on peculiar problems that will, make us come face to face with our inadequacies, it does help. The relevance is, because of my standpoint, I will quickly look at law reform. Now, because of the concurrent jurisdiction of both the state and the federal government in making laws as to certain subject matters, I am happy that the Governors Forum is represented here, meaning that you need to apply laws as to political inclusion. So we need to go beyond the 35% affirmative action that has been ratified at the judicial level to now make it a legislative level. That's a very important relevance of this study. Because when Buka was making this presentation, he highlighted the massive inadequacy in the area of inclusivity. Whereas we've had international recommendations and a judicial pronouncement in this country as to the 35% affirmation, it is urgent now for states in our country to state houses of assembly to make laws insisting and including processes of ensuring that women and people with disabilities are represented in governance. Even though I see a greater area of need in the area of our institutional strength. I mean, it is the democratic institutions, the strength of our democratic institutions at the state level, which for me, I think to a large extent are non-existent. However, because we must rely on verifiable and empirical data that KDI has brought up, we can see a situation where legislative reforms can actually prove the relevance of this reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're talking about legislative reforms. I know some people are making moves for women to have seats legislated on. I don't know how far we've come with that. Mr. Subnational, responding to the same question.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I will start by thanking KDI for the opportunity to be here and for the good job you've done. I think there are some things that I would like to make reference to. First of all, what this overall report has shown is that we still operate a centralized federalism, what we like to call unitary federalism. And I think it's such a sad development because we started with regionalism, which was at its peak in the 50s, 60s, only for us to eventually get back to this as a result of the military. And yet, we're back to the Fourth Republic, and it looks like there is no deliberate effort for states to free themselves from federal thinking. Yeah, the Constitution has actually given it room for us to be able to go back and practice some sort of regionalism that will help the states to develop. And I'm very sure that from what we've seen here, a lot of people will have been shocked. Those of us who are in the media are not really shocked because we know this happens every now and then. When we send reporters to interview speakers, some speakers of state houses of assembly can't even speak good English. They're not able to communicate. And the worst crime you can make as a journalist in the state is for you to ask for the state budget. And you'll be shocked that even states like Lagos, a lot of us, journalists and media houses, we have our head offices in Lagos. And I think some of my colleagues are here. I want to ask if anyone has ever seen the budget of Lagos State House of Assembly. done several efforts to actually get that document because we think that Lagos is one of the most progressive states. In quotes, that we think will be able to push certain reforms and all of that in the country. But unfortunately, it's terrible that we are unable to. So if you don't get the state budget, how do you know where the monies are going to? And these are the basic things that you should know as a taxpayer. I actually have a problem with this report, Mr. Kedia. Why will you exempt the Federal Capital Territory? I mean, because the FCT is a component part of the federation, whether you like it or not. Look at, apart from the debate that happened last time, I'm sorry, open disclosure, I'm actually from the FCT myself, I'm one of the indigenous people. But let's take a look at what the Constitution says. The Constitution actually makes this place look like a military contraption that is still existing in a democracy. A whole lot of confusion. So you say this place is undemocratic, and I'm very sure that's the reason why you are free to go into it. But this same Constitution tells us that this place, the governor of the FCT is actually the president of the country. And the State House of Assembly is the National Assembly. And then, of course, the judiciary and all of that. But do you know that former ministers of the FCT themselves, they've always complained that everything here seems to be shrouded in mystery. That's because the National Assembly has failed to perform its duties as the State House of Assembly. I remember sometime in 2012, Jumoke Akinjide, the Minister of State for Federal Capital Territory, raised an alarm that they will send memos, several memos to the National Assembly, being the State House of Assembly of the FCT. These memos won't be taken care of. But when it has to do with budgets, that has to do with money bills and all of that, they are keen. Or if it has to do with lands, they are keen to touch that. But when it comes to the basic aspects of governance, like you would have taken cognizance of here, you'll be surprised that things only happen within the city center. And then the 6 area councils are just existing, not so much. Just recently we hear, for example, the Minister of FCT saying that the monies, the IGR that is meant for the states, for the local government areas or the area councils are going to be converted into paying teachers, salaries and all of that. So you now ask yourself, why would the component parts of the Federal Capital Territory, for example, not be able to pay teachers, and yet an individual can unilaterally decide to push their internal IGR to, for example, to the payment of the teacher. So something is wrong. The president himself is not performing his role very well. Isn't it a time for you as a taxpayer to start demanding that if you are living in Abuja here, that you need democratic participation that takes your views into cognizance? So why don't we have the State House of Assembly, for example, in Abuja? That's like the UK and all of that. Very quickly before I wrap up, the other issue that I want to talk about is the issues of oversight. I mean, we would have seen here very clearly that State House of Assembly members don't attend, sessions and all of that. It will be surprising to you that even the National Assembly, many of our lawmakers don't attend. So we've raised these issues over and over, but if you're very close to the Speaker or you're close to the Senate President, if you don't feel that attendance, it doesn't affect you so much. But if you're in the opposition party on the days you misbehave, it will be used against you. That's when that will be brought forth. So your linking of this to what we've seen here is very, very important. Legislative oversight, we mustn't leave it to you alone. But in conclusion, what I want to say is on the issues of accountability. Accountability is very, very important for us to be able to know that even the states that we have seen doing yellow here, we need to still hold them to account in certain aspects. When it comes to finances, yeah, we hear that this budget is not reachable, we can't get the response. But when it comes to the disbursement of the monies, how much of, for example, 100 million naira that is disbursed, how much actually gets down there? So finally, that's where I want to end, because we as journalists have conclusion from what we discovered from the states is that for every 100 million naira that's released, I can tell you that less than 5% actually gets the projects being done. And most of the projects that are being done are done by cronies. The cronies chronism system that's running in these things. And so accountability becomes difficult, but with this report, it becomes much easier for us to be able to hold governments accountable and ask them to do what they said they're going to do during elections.
Thank you very much. When you ask the journalist question, in fact, it's like a Pandora's box, a lot has to come out, and then to the report. Dr. Amechi, responding to the same question.
Okay, thank you so much. State of democratic performance in Nigeria. Sometimes they say we're not a knowledge-driven society. So when I see researches like this, I get so much excited because every activity takes us away from looking at what the problems are, causes, and preferring solutions. And that's what exactly this report has tried to do. Kudos. Our problem, in spite of the fact that we operate around democracy, our problem goes beyond democracy. It's about our cultural values, inclinations that are weak. In fact, at some point, I want to describe it as an atavism, genetic throwback to an earlier form of civilization. Even before the British came, the way our pre-colonial societies were organized are much better than what we have today under democracy. The beautiful stories of your empire, maybe in Igbo city-states and all that, you see organization, you see responsibility, and you notice accountability. They are all accepted. What we have today, perhaps the presidential system of government was a good. It created despots, people that are worse than monarchs. As if we were, even in the period of theocracy, we didn't find this one man running the show, destroying institutions, structures, and processes. And the focus on the states tells us that at the base, that's where the major problems are. When the governor becomes the House of Assembly, decides who will be the opposition, decides what budget is, if budget exists, goes to bed, gets wings, and implements it the next month. That's exactly how despots govern. And that's because our democratic institutions, I wouldn't say fail, but are weak and are decaying. So when we are faced with this kind of problem, it's not a problem of democracy, it's a problem of values, morals, and inclination. Because beyond governance structure, democratic governance structure, within the family level, within private institutions, within government institutions, you see this attitude of Oga at the top, and nobody can call the person to question. It goes beyond our democracies. Values and culture, we are aligning to that value that, oh, because it's the big man or the big woman, there is nothing we can do. So we have a responsibility using this report as a base to begin to find out ways we can restore and strengthen our values in such a way that every person, every structure, every institution will know what role to play and how to play it. If not, we see a situation where one man at the head determines what happens down the line. It does also a positive impact. Perhaps one of the first steps we think is to take another look at the presidential system of government. The essence, I know when after the Civil War, we said we needed a strong president who would be strong enough to wield the country together and provide that much needed leadership. That was what was envisaged. In reality, it was envisaged that that president or the governor would be a patriotic person driven by public interest and inclined towards helping the society. But we have seen people that are otherwise. So take a look at that presidential system and see what has eroded that culture of accountability and all that, and see whether we can try other forms of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please, I've been advised to inform our panelists when you're done speaking, just turn off your mic and turn it back on when you want to speak. For the benefit of the media who are wondering, the panelists are called so far. Barrister Francis is a human rights lawyer, is Executive Director of Citizen Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights. Mr. Subnational is the Director of News and Politics Editor, Arise News. Dr. Abicha Nakwe is also the Director of News, Briefer, political analyst. Yes. If you listen to a political platform across Nigeria, you know what I'm talking about. So the next question will now go to Mr. Olubafemi John Adebayo. Let's look at the dimension and the dimensions.
Mic check.
What are the dimensions you mentioned? Let's just now work on that. And why these dimensions were selected? We're looking at internet policies. Why you choose this one? And how they interact to define our democratic performance.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think it's
So I've been giving them this mic.
each of the dimensions, so for that. But what is important is just to reiterate the fact that electoral participation is actually one of it, which pretty much shows how people are engaging the process of electioneering in the country. Political inclusion talks about how individuals, demographics are represented. I think simply put that manner. Institution is also about, democratic institutional performance is talking towards how decisions are being made, policies are being implemented or possibly enforced. And civic space is talking about how people freely or are able to freely express their, their opinions, and most importantly, influence, policies. And I think that's very, very important. But just to say that the data here shows, and from the presentation, that these dimensions, they do not necessarily automatically reinforce one another. I think this is very, very important to note. Because we've seen instances where a state can have high electoral participation, but at the end of the day, when it comes to institution, it's very weak. And I think that is why we're having a process where citizens are elated to participate in the electoral process. Maybe due to electoral information that have gone out wild. Civil society had spoken about the fact that, for instance, just using this as an example, Beavers is the game changer. High rep will be this, just for instance. And eventually, on the election day, those things will not function optimally the way it's supposed to function. So, but again, it's also the fact that you see where a state where participation is on the high side, but at the end of the day, it doesn't translate into political inclusion. Where you have citizens that are engaging the process, but eventually it's not leading to political inclusion. But the third point I want to make, which is my last point for this segment, is the fact that the Democracy Performance Index, I don't want us to see it as a binary. Because it is not about good or bad, it is not about strong or weak in the real sense, but it is about we learning those lessons and the peculiarity of each of the states. And one of the things that amazed me in the report is the fact that if we look at a state, for instance, like Yobe, and if you look at the neighboring states, you see that there is a lot of things that the northern divide, using that word loosely, can learn from such a state in terms of the democratic institutional performance and some of the things that are obtainable in terms of transparency, information, availability of information, and all of those. Because if you look at it, what they will learn from that state can also transform, because they have pretty much, they have the same kind of culture, they have the same kind of issues affecting in terms of region when we talk about insecurity. So insecurity to the real sense cannot even be an excuse for underperformance. That's what Yobe has shown us. So these are some of the things that I want to reinforce in this. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much for that. I'm too curious. When the state gets this report, I mean, we look at Ethiopia and the rest of the life. Maybe you need to travel to Oyo State and get to learn from the moderate operators. Right. Thank you very much. Oluwafemi is the head research and strategy at KPI. The next question will go to a professor, and I know it will get very thorough, academic, and very practical also. And I'm directing this one to Professor Ernest Now, considering the dimensions that have been presented and talked about, how will you assess the overall impact on the state of Nigeria's democracy, and why?
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to start from the same place that Professor Kennedy started. He started with definition and measurement. Because if you don't define, you will not be able to determine the parameters with which you would be able to measure. And so when Prof defined, eventually he told us that we have liberal and illiberal democracy. And it is something that is creeping into the studies of democracy, which I feel is dangerous, because it is actually giving impetus to the erosion and perversion of democracy when we begin to talk about illiberal democracy. In Nigeria, we say, if it is not Panadol, it can never be like Panadol. If it is not democracy, it is not democracy. We cannot be talking about an illiberal democratic system because democracy itself thrives in a liberal environment that the Prof talked about. And so what does this report indicate about the Nigerian democratic system? It shows one thing, and I think it was Somna who mentioned it, that there is a gradual decline of democracy in Nigeria, what people will famously refer to as democratic recession. But the dangerous thing is that before a democracy declines or recedes, of course we talk about democracy receding because we talk about the waves of democracy. And so when the waves of democracy are losing its strength, you talk about recession. Now, but before recession, something more dangerous happens. And it happens unnoticed, and it happens undetected. We call it democratic erosion, or democratic decay that he also talked about. An object doesn't decay in one day. It gradually decays, it gradually erodes. And so what this is showing is that there is a gradual but undetected, something we are not even talking about, erosion of democratic practice in Nigeria. What is democratic erosion? It is the gradual relapse into authoritarian system, the system you had left earlier. So you are gradually relapsing into that system where undemocratic forces and tendencies, gradually creep into the system undetected and unnoticed. And so the question would be, what are those undemocratic forces, undemocratic tendencies? Amechi Anakwe, mentioned some of them, where you would have the institution of the state, of course, is personalized. The state becomes the individual running the state. The legislature also is pocketed. Now, all the institutions, whether you are talking about formal, informal, and I noticed that this report focused more on the formal, and it will be important for us also to be looking at the informal, public opinion. How does public opinion influence what government does? Because that is really what democracy is, public participation in the business of the society. And so it is this gradual erosion of democracy, especially at the state level, that this report really tells us about and talks about. And it is a dangerous one because it is unnoticed, it is undetected, and before you know it, the system, the democratic system becomes, recedes or backslides, as scholars have talked about. But importantly also, as I wrap up, is to mention that Prof, in his very good lecture, isolated the legislature and said that in seeking solution to the challenges, that we should be looking at the civil society, the office of the citizen, and I think he mentioned an independent judiciary. Now, I think it would be dangerous for us to live here believing that you can reverse this trend by just concentrating on this trend. Now, the legislature is key. In fact, the legislature is the fulcrum of democracy anywhere in the world, because ideally it should represent, it should project, it should be the eyes, the mouthpiece,
it is like the connection between the people and government. And so if you are to arrest recession in any society, the legislature has to be the key institution to reform. Yes, you can say that the legislature in Nigeria, and as all over the world, it is never popular. Now, the legislature in Nigeria, yes, might have disappointed us, but then you can't reform and redeem the system in isolation of the legislature. One of the things we have always talked about is that the military dictatorship thrived in Nigeria because there was no legislature. If you talk about the judiciary was always there, but then the legislature was not there. And so if you are to redeem and to reverse the trend of what this data is showing, then we must look at strengthening the institution of the legislature, but not by providing all of those capacity buildings that we have provided earlier, but by ensuring that the people themselves get involved in the business of the legislature. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof.
All right, I think.
Thank you very much.
I was told the people online can't hear clearly, so that was for their benefit. Thank you very much. Professor Ernest Dereke is a professor, Department of Political Science and International Relations, University of Abuja. I was tempted when you were speaking, sir, to ask you at what point did the decay start? Because almost 26 years into the Fourth Republic, is it from here or from the past? Because sometimes, when you're looking at this study, I'm glad you're an academician also, you want to look at where did it start to go downhill?
You want me to respond to that?
Just quickly.
Okay, so as much as possible not to go theoretical, because there are studies have been conducted to show that a democracy can actually begin to decay from the beginning, depending on the preceding regime, before that democracy was instituted. And so if you look at the Nigerian system, it was a military dictatorship. And then the military, had to leave for democracy, for us to have the contraption we now call democracy. Now, it means therefore that some of the structures laid by the military government were inherited by the so-called democracy that we have. And so it started affecting that democracy from the beginning. Some democracies can begin to decay midway into the journey. Some can be at the beginning. Some can be afterwards. But a whole lot of factors also account for this decay. One, of course, is when the people feel that, for instance, in the case of Nigeria, the civil society, and when I mention the civil society, I'm talking about all of us. We are only satisfied that on May 29th, 1999, the military went back to the barracks, and so we let down our guards, and then allowed civilian autocrats to take over the system.
Thank you so much, Prof. I just need to know how far back, but one thing we take from here is the fact that there is actual decay, and we've seen it in the report that is being presented. Thank you very much, Prof, for that. More questions this time around. Omolara Akinyeye. What direction of it? Oh. You were just asking me about Lagos State. So over to you, man. Looking at, reflecting on the findings, what are you seeing in practice, or do they, challenge the existing assumptions that we have about our democratic performance?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, once again, everyone. And I will take it from what all the panelists have said, and I will wrap it up this way. Professor Dereke mentioned something, and I actually wrote it down when Prof Professor Guyemi was making his brilliant presentation earlier. And he said, that democracy works by the instrumentality of institutions. And that is it. And I wrote it down, I said, because he mentioned independent judiciary in his proposition as to how we begin to engage. And I said, what about independent legislature? Because, we cannot sit down and say, oh, National Assembly sometimes they are rubber stamp, they are this, they are that, they are not inclusive, they are not all of this. But if democracy works by the instrumentality of institutions, then what makes that democracy is the sitting of all three of them, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So why the executive has its independence for all times and purposes, maybe this other two, their independence is challenged in various ways, maybe by one of the arms of government. And Mr. Sumner talked about oversight, the other side, and that's the bane of everything. Oversight by citizens, oversight by the legislature as well. Because when you make laws and you appropriate monies to be spent, you have to have an oversight on those before. And the beauty of it is that budget is a yearly occurrence. So if this year you have an oversight on the budget this year, and you're able to find gaps and spaces where you think there should be amendment, that same budget should not come the following year, and you are still looking at it with the same eye you looked at it the previous year. It has to have a different meaning to you before you can then say, I can appropriate another another sum of money for you to go and spend. And that's looking at it from the point of oversight. I'm looking at the report from the instrumentality of institutions making up our democracy. If our institutions are weak, Prof made mention of America. The reason Trump is checkmated is because the democracy of America, to a large extent, is still very strong. There are still people who can checkmate him. Mr. President, you can't do this. And whether by force or by any form of rule, he still has to, in a form of, comply with those decisions that have been made. But when in a place you have your democracy is as loose as it's just one person that dictates for even the other arms of government, what policy will the judiciary make really? Whether at the Supreme Court, where is the court of policy? What policies can they really make? And I talked about, I'm dwelling on oversight because I see that is where our problem is. And Prof, you talked about eternal vigilance by CSOs. I can say that, Prof, that CSOs are vigilant. Yep. We, to a large extent, were vigilant. And the burden of this nation rests on civil society. We all said that we're all civil society group. That burden rests, because it's always the civil society people that come out, stick out their necks to say this is wrong. And we do that for even the politicians that are causing some of the problems that we're experiencing. We stand up to fight, even when they are being wrong, when things go wrong. We speak up for these people. And, talking about activation of the Office of the Citizens. Oh, yes, that office is activated. The Office of Citizens is activated, but how effective it is. And if you look at that office, perhaps the same thing we are trying to cure is the same problem that office has. Do we agree with that? So those institutions, an institution is as good as the people that run the institution. And that's the truth. So whether it's the Office of the Citizen, either it's the National Assembly, either the judiciary, it's as good as the people that run them. So if there are defects in the administration and the operation by those people that run those institutions, we are going to have these defects that we are having. And that's why you can say a state like Yobe has pass mark in certain areas that state like Lagos or any other, or some other state that we would have expected would have a pass mark, does not have a pass marking. So it has nothing to do with the level of that development. And I'm happy that Prof mentioned that. I wrote it down somewhere, that economic growth, has nothing to do with the Is it a form of democracy that is being practiced in that place? And that's the truth. So at the end of the day, it still comes back to the people who run this democracy. It comes back to the beneficiaries of the democracy. It comes back to the managers of those who run a democracy. And that's what I see in this, that, the managers of those democracies in different states, it's the level of operation, is their attempt at defining what democracy means for them that helps them in running the state. It has not, if states are getting more money, are you getting more service delivery from the state? It doesn't correlate, it doesn't mean more money means more development. It doesn't mean fewer funds means, lack of development or greater development. So, I think that is the managers of this democracy and how they define it that actually makes democracy effective in any society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, she's the Deputy Executive Director of Policy, Legal and Advocacy Center, PLAC. Thank you very much for that. Now, I know we're pressed for time, so we're going to throw it open. Aha, the hands have gone up really fast. Because of time, can we do it in a minute? Just 1 minute, your contribution, and we'll get straight to it. So I will start from this side of the table and move. Just one hand there and two here. Starting with you, sir. Please just introduce yourself and speak.
Thank you very much. My name is Okwemi Oladimeji, and I lead Future Builders Initiative. So I just want to say, because of my own demography, the young people, I was actually looking through to find, what the demographic of the people that responded. But I want to believe that, the larger percentage of the people are going to be young people. But the true fact of the matter is our own definition of democracy, of what development is very different. A larger percentage of elder people here have witnessed what military government looks like. People born between 1990 to date have not seen what, in quotes, bad military government is. But in opposite, what we're seeing in other West African countries is military government that looks like a developing democracy. So, and I will say, just like Prof said, that what we are witnessing here is a civilian autocracy. Every institution, every indicators that we find here, young people are taking the bigger part of the issue. Political exclusion, civil liberty being trampled upon, and even when it comes to political participation. I saw a video of a young man in Kwara State who wanted to contest for House of Assembly, and he has participated in everything about that political party, but it was said that he cannot even purchase the nomination form, even when he has the money. So myself, who also believe that I want to contest one day, I've already seen that it begins to be, question our own thoughts if we are even wanted. But the danger is that in 2050, that most of all of us, myself for example, I'll be close to 60 by then, the young people that are coming now, what are they going to inherit? Are we ready to give them what we have now and then to run with as democracy?
Well, you're not too young to run, so you might as well champion that cause. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Taking it from, I was already thinking of what he was saying, but I want to add to it. My name is Professor Julius Anjorin. Trying to look at the generational cohort in Nigeria, where you have different generations and they are taught. 2 or 3 days ago, I think I was discussing with my daughter, and I realized that what she was talking about in relation to democracy is completely different from my own perspective. I'm asking a question. How do we get to a point where there will be a conglomeration of ideas from one generation to the other, especially bearing in mind the challenges that we are talking about concerning our democracy? Secondly, I want to talk about what is happening in Burkina Faso. Traoré took over in 2022, and January 2026 he said, nothing like democracy. What lesson can we learn from this? Because looking at it, it means that for him and for so many other African countries, democracy has not given the type of dividend that we expect. Therefore, in a forum like this nature, we should also look at what can we do to save our democracy. And lastly, I want to believe that it's getting to a point that we need to define what our own democracy should be not necessarily copying from abroad. In fact, when I was doing my PhD, I called something domestication of policy. Have we got it to a level where we can domesticate our own, we can learn from others? But somehow, this report is showing us that we have to come home, look at what we need to do to define what works for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. What do you say?
Thank you very much. My name is Jaye Gaskia. I want to speak about three things very quickly, and I will try to be very quick because I'm not known to be a quick speaker. So the first thing for me is that I think is to commend KDI for this step that has been taken, because for far too long, attention has been focused on the center, on federal institutions, as if actually that's where people live. People don't live. Citizens of Nigeria, they don't live at the federal level. They live in states, in local government. So the fact that we are now beginning to shift attention back to holding state institutions, governance, and the political class accountable at that level is very important for me and instructive. So I think, so having said that, this report therefore gives us quite a lot of food for thought. So for me, it's a beginning. It opens up a Pandora's box for engagement and for conversations. But at least we have a baseline. So in the presentation of your report, and I was just gisting with, and I said to myself, I said, okay, so how do you correlate, for example, electoral participation, political participation, civic engagement, and for example now, local government autonomy? Those states that had very high level of, are we saying that the challenges that local governments have in terms of governance and delivering have actually at moderate level in those states? That's not the truth. So for me, what I'm saying therefore is that this gives us a basis for us to do further and deeper, interrogation of the things that we need to actually really interrogate. So that's the second thing for me. The third thing for me is that, again, I look at a category like inclusion, and then I heard what you said. So we talk about women, we talk about youth, we talk about people with disability. And when you showed that map, it was really quite very instructive and revealing. But you see, you know what I jotted down? I said that is a map of the state of exclusion within the elite, amongst the elite. Because is the poor represented? And if we have a population where people who don't have opportunities, 60% of the population, to what extent are they actually? So to what extent is that young man, a young man who is a worker, who is a middle class? To what extent is that woman, even that 4 out of 18? To what extent is that woman actually also representative of the entire diversity of women in the country? So, like I said, it then gives us a basis for us to begin to make this interrogation. And finally, because I have to talk about this because you mentioned it, this intergenerational gap, and then this question about whether democracy is attractive, and whether, because the question for me really about military dictatorships, and I just mentioned even Libya under Gaddafi, is not necessarily whether they bring development or they don't bring development. Is that to what extent can you as a citizen express your displeasure with the policies of that regime, and what role can you play in changing that regime so that you can have a different regime? I don't care whether it's a dictatorship whether it's a democracy. But to what extent can you play that role? We know that it is far more difficult to do under a military dictatorship than it is under a democracy. And for generations, I think that the challenge with intergenerational something is that we are still looking at socialization from the way we used to look at it in the past. Every socialization process has been aided by the technology of that age. We are at a time in the history of humanity right now, I'm rounding up, okay. Right now, where what you have is that previously socialization takes place more or less interpersonal, and it's very physical. Even when it is the community that is raising the child, it's very physical. But now, socialization takes place online. It is dispersed, it is impersonal. And so it further then widens the gap, because then generations are actually not talking to one another. How do we bridge that gap using that same technology to do that? Because without having those conversations, we will not be able to actually consolidate anything. So sorry for taking your time.
Thank you very much. So we'll go. Was this hand up earlier? Was it up earlier? All right. So the two hands, then we'll go to this side of. I promise you we're coming on this side. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to also commend KDI. Why the team lead was trying to explain and unveil the report. He cautioned against framing the report as having war state versus fairly moderate state. But we are all aware that politicians have a way of weaponizing rankings, especially during this era of elections. I won't be surprised this evening when you start hearing or reading screaming headlines, the two war states and stuff like that. I have some of our very senior colleagues on the panel. What safeguards can we from here articulate to ensure that, of course, a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon will save, the same scalpel in the hand of a tout will kill? How can we ensure that this report is used for the purpose is intended for reforms, rather than having weapons for politicians to throw at each other? That's, for me, one question I think our panelists should help us talk about. The second one, of course, is the area of inclusion. We've seen that not a single state has a moderate score when it comes to inclusion of youth, women, and PWDs. Can we try to possibly go a bit further to probe the causes? Are they legal restraint? Is it due to party gatekeepings by men? Or sometimes maybe culture and religion? And most importantly, can we now have maybe any of the states that scored very low scores as maybe a model to begin with? Since we have some states that practically scored, I saw some of the scores, almost flat zero, at least to start with, as models of inclusion for youth, PWDs, and women.
Yeah, thank you.
Thought you were going to say model for failure. I almost panicked.
Okay.
But yeah, good place to start. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Achike Chude. I'm the National Secretary of the Nigeria Union of Journalists, NUJ. I want to thank the professor for a very cerebral talk, and then especially, obviously, that his discussion devolved from the very wonderful work that KDI has done. And what KDI has done is to provide us with a formula. Just like you have mathematical formulas for those who are good in mathematics, you cannot solve certain equations without applying this formula. So they have also told us, for instance, when the argument is being made about the advancement of our democracy, whether it is working or not, you can use that, data-driven, to also tell people why democracy is failing in Nigeria. And that's a very wonderful job that they have done. The good professor, when he was talking about it, perhaps he tried to encourage us when he talked about the fact that maybe we are making haste slowly. I do not think, and I think Bukola, the ED of KDI, talked about that. We do not have time. There was no time in Somalia's Siad Barre. There was no time in Liberia, Sergeant Samuel Kanyendo. There was no time with Sierra Leone's Valentin Strasser and Zaire's Congo's Mobutu Sese Seko. There's a cycle that we're all seeing that is repeating itself time and time again. In fact, theorists have said that the most critical period, the most vulnerable period in the life of any nation is the period of transition from, what was before to democratization. That is the most critical and the most vulnerable period in the history of countries. And no wonder, I think, when Amechi was talking, he talked about what was going on in, Africa, West African countries and the rest. The crisis of governance that we are seeing from one country to the other, and then the coups that are also taking place. These are simply because of that process that we are talking about. And again, this conversation is also critical. It's happening at a time when the country is convulsing, when we are facing critical security situation that is a threat to the Nigerian state. And then you have a set of political elites that do not have a sense of the urgency and the vision that is needed to put the country away from the brink. So it's worrying, it's worrisome, it's troubling that in spite of the dangers, obvious dangers that are facing all of us, in the face, you have politicians and the elites that are going about just like, as they say, that bird that puts his head in the sand thinking that nobody's looking at his rump. So it's a good job that you have done, but it should be something that we should use as a basis to also understand the unfolding dynamics in the Nigerian state today. And it is unfortunate that the biggest people who should be the biggest beneficiaries of democracy are the biggest problems of democracy, and that is the political elite in the country. So we will keep on doing what we have to do. I commend you for this job, but let us know that we cannot wait for as long as the Americans waited or the British waited before they built their democracy to a particular level. We need to do something about our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So we now move to the right side of the table.
Okay. My name is Ibrahim Tafawa Balewa. I'm a researcher in the areas of peace, security, and development. Now, a lot has been said, but can you hear me? They can barely hear me? Okay, let me get closer to the mic. So a lot has been said. My name is Ibrahim Tafawa Balewa. I'm from Bauchi State. I'm a researcher in the areas of peace, security, and development. I'm sure, Nicola, you didn't know what my PhD was on. Did you know? So my PhD a couple of years ago was on legislative turnover at the subnational level. And I used Bauchi State, my state, as the case study. So, can they hear me? So I use my state, Bauchi State, as a case study. So everything that's been said this morning and into this afternoon, it's so pertinent. And the similar challenges we had trying to get data. So for me, I'm an advocate for going back to the micro. We spend so much time talking about macro. There's so much literature, but in the process of my research, I struggled to get data and information of micro activities, subnational level, when it comes to parliament, democracy, good governance, politics, anything. So this is a very, very welcome initiative, and I think it's something that I wish I had. Even though I'm going to come up with a publication soon, I think it's something I had. But quickly, because of want of time, what I wanted to add to this conversation was something that I think we've slightly skipped, which is the fundamentals when it comes to democracy, which is the formation of the parties. So I truly believe that the lack of evolution of our political parties has been a major factor in this problem that we're talking about today, because it's on a platform of a party that all these individuals vie for positions and get into positions of leadership. So if our political parties don't have a clear doctrine, is it fiscal, is it monetary, is it agricultural based or education? None of the parties since 1999 have held on to a clear doctrine. And without a doctrine, there's a disconnect between the people. The people normally will identify with these doctrines and then follow suit. So that also gets civil society to add that pressure. You say that you're going to focus on agriculture. How come when you're in government you haven't focused on agriculture? Or you're going to focus on defense, military might, you know, strengthen the armed forces for the first 3 years. So if there's no clear doctrine by the parties, then there's no vehicle to ride, there's no wave to ride on. So I think it's something that we really must put into this conversation and really put it at the forefront. We have to find a way to develop our political system, the environment, and then this comes from the parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dr. Idris Salis Orogo from Kano. Definitely, there is no gainsaying that our democratic ideals is eroding gradually, and also there is serious problem that threatened democratic reversal in the country. Definitely, ideal democratic principles were the issues we discussed here. But sometimes when you ask the politicians, they have their own principles of winning elections. So one of our major problems in this country is what Professor or Dr. Yusuf Bala Usman called ignorance, knowledge, and democratic politics in Nigeria. Today, as made mention by Hillary Clinton in one of her statements, she says, and I quote, "The most immediate source of disconnect between Nigeria's wealth and its poverty is the failure of governance at all levels. Lack of transparency and accountability have eroded the legitimacy of the government and lead to the rise of groups that embrace violence and reject the authority of the state." Today in Nigeria, we are juxtaposed with so many problems. One of the major problems of politics and politicians in the country is not themselves, but rather what one of the famous psychological scholars call classical conditioning. Our electorate are conditioned in such a way that you as a leader or elected politician into office, you are conditioned to act the way they so-called want you to act. And it's one of the major problems that politicians find themselves. Today, in the core northern part of the country, you cannot win an election without, compromising some of your principles, no matter how good you are. Another issue is the gatekeepers. You have gatekeepers, people who help you to ascend into the power. You have to also go according to their tunes and aspirations. So sometimes when you talk about theory, when you go back down there to practice the politics, you find it very difficult in an ideal sense. If not, you'll be kicked out after 4 years. So my issue here is civil society organizations and some of us, because we are critical stakeholders in democratic consolidation in the country, we need to enlighten our electorate. They need to know who can do this and what is an ideal democratic principles, so as we go in the same page, so that we can be able to achieve our desired and predetermined objectives. Lastly,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you for getting the cue. Okay, I have two hands. There. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you very much. My name is Enede. Even though I studied economics, I studied accounting and journalism, I would prefer to simplify this matter, just like Prof did. Prof, with all his knowledge, there was something he told us. He said, look, we should make sure that we are eternally vigilant. So I'd like us to take it from there to see what solution we can profile. I was talking to some youth and they said there is no hope for this country. I say I'm damn optimistic. One, if you look at section 32 and 39 of the Nigerian Constitution, the media has that role to play. I'm not saying they are superhuman beings, but take the lead. Civil society, follow. All other persons, let nobody be sitting on the fence say, yes. Sometimes when we go to speak, you say, very good, tell them. No, you too, because we are facing existential problems now. The liability we carry is unfair. Every day they are asking you for money, especially if they see us now on television, they think you have a lot of money like the politicians. There is a solution. What can we do? The solution is there. It's about debt that is being owed, and we can enforce the payment of this debt. Political parties, we should focus on them. They are a major problem to us. The National Assembly as a pillar of democracy, they are a major problem to us. Is it that we can't do anything? We are not that helpless. Please, I'd like us to gather our energy together and begin to. I know if you have not eaten enough, you will not be able to go and talk on television if you don't have transport money. But if you stay where you are, will it help us? So please, I want to encourage all of us that even on the women issue, the legal vacuum that we have seen that is causing this regression. Now, if I ask all of us here, where are we with the special seats bill? Are we going to be able to answer? Should that be, somebody should be able to respond to us. We should ask questions and the person to respond. So, Kedi, I thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to reflect whether we want to live or want to exist as Nigerians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been reliably informed that the bill is at the committee level right now, waiting for a vote. It's going through the whole process.
The process.
All right, sir. Go ahead.
I'm really impressed for what... My name is Michael Adidotun. Okay, I'm a researcher. I really commend the work of KDI for what they have been doing for the past 15 years. I've been following them. It was indeed great, and I want you to continue with the good work. The question which I want to find out, which we also need to speak about the limitation of the studies. First, it told us that FCT is not being captured, and which I look somehow. What other limitation of the studies? Then I still believe that there is still hope in Nigeria. Let us continue to be hopeful for the situation we find ourselves, and let us continue to engage with this present administration, because they have a lot of renewed hope agenda. How can we now tailor this to fit into their renewed hope agenda for the country? Once again, I wish everybody good, safe trip, and I believe that this country will go forward by God's grace. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. It almost felt like the closing remark, but there's still something else we have to add to the presentation. I think we've taken it. Mr. Sumner, I saw your hands up. Can you do it in 30 seconds?
Sorry, I just needed to add this. I think we've been lamenting so much. The problem that I think at times that comes with civil society and maybe some of us in the media, and I try to tell my colleagues that it's not as if we don't have solutions. The major problem that we have is lack of democratic innovations. In other society, you see there's American democracy, there's British democracy. There are no two democracies that are the same. Why can't we have a Nigerian democracy? For example, why can't civil society drive an initiative where we have our political system transformed in a way that will make, for example, can we be innovative and hold and change our constitution to hold elections without political parties conducting presidential election? Let's be innovative. For example, we could drive a conversation that says, if we say the political parties are our problem, then let's derive a system that works for Nigeria where presidential election or whatever election that will be held at that level would be such that you don't need political parties and gatekeepers. Because that's why Peter Obi is running from here to there and all of that. Because of these huge gatekeepers, they have army of followers and all of that, and they control political party primaries and all of that. So we can say, okay, for parliamentary election, yes, National Assembly, you can go do political parties and all of that. If you see the American democracy, you see that that's what Trump is trying to run away from, the hegemony of the political parties. And if you look at the founding fathers of the America, one of them was very careful in stating, look at the first leader of America. Do you know that he was elected without political parties? And he warned carefully that the idea of bringing political parties in place, he's afraid that in the future they are going to be, cronies, people who hijack the system and make it difficult for people to be able to get the kind of leaders that they deserve. And so if we go to copy a system and the system is not working for us, why must we be fixated at that system? Why can't we change? And this is not just at the top. It's also at the local government level. For example, the president has tried very well in introducing an innovation that I feel the civil society groups are not supporting very well. The idea of having a local government autonomy where the system works down there. Because we've been hijacked by governors. Governors at the middle. Go to the UK, for example. They don't have governors. How come the system is working for them? They only have the top and the middle. And the floor, the councillors. How come they were able to remove the governors and their system is working? Is there anybody that says we must continue to have governors? Why can't we be innovative in our democratic practices? Councillors, for example, now are not meeting. You go to local councils, they only meet when allocations come. Or the local government chairman, they only come to office. A local government chairman whose community is very far will be living in the state capital. If it is not working, CSOs make this up, send bills. We can send private members' bills to the National Assembly or State Houses of Assembly to be innovative. Because if not, we'll continue to be singing all these songs. And excuse me, the CSOs, why are you always waiting for funders from abroad? Why can't we do that?
All right.
If they don't give us money, we can't attend to our own issues. That's why we're there.
You know, it started from you saying the media should leave.
Wait,
So you took
please.
it.
Right of reply.
Vice Tete.
See, look, let me tell you something. One of the characteristics of law is certainty. We don't talk as if we are in a merry-go-round and waking wishes and all sort of things. No, we've got a law that says democracy is not the best form of government. In Nigeria, we're practicing democracy by choice. Because, yes, that's why our law says that practice democracy, practice the principles of democracy. And you don't think that's going to be easy. The respected Damechi Anakwe PhD holder, my dear friend, whose democratic rights were breached, I was able to get him 5 billion. I don't know why he has not collected it. He has promised me 20% when they punished him for speaking too much. Let me tell you something. You see, in this country, he was talking about the halcyon days of the pre-colonial times. In this country, we have never had any halcyon days in terms of democracy. Whether in the first republic, the second republic, and the third republic, we've had some of the worst politicians in the first republic. That's why we had the civil war. So let nobody tell me that democracy is eroding. No, we've not even practiced it. So we chose it, and it's a journey. Because it's a journey, that's why we have reports like this that show us the gaps, how we need to improve. If you think that democracy is not the best form of government for Nigeria, give me another option. Because you don't have another option, we made up our minds in 1979 and 1998 that looking at the confusion and the conglomeration you call Nigeria, the best form of government is democracy. And since we have chosen, we are not investing enough in even learning it, understanding it, knowing what it is. Because let me tell you what democracy promises. And I'm happy for you, Jaigas here. I'm not surprised because you're an experienced man. What democracy doesn't promise you much of development. No, it promises you freedom. It promises you free election. It promises you, free and fair elections. It promises you, your ability to vote. One more thing, and the last thing. If you have freedom, you will have a lot of billionaires. Let nobody deceive you. We did all this nonsense talk about military takeover and the rest of them. In Nigeria, let us wake up. And I respect my dear friend. Let me not end without telling him this. That there is a price to pay for democracy, and this is the price. Go and study what the problems are. Let us know what the gaps are and improve on them. If you think we don't want to pay the price, give me another option, and let's face it.
Thank you very much, Vice Adeke. The vibe I got was for us to have a tailor-made democratic.
We already have it. Let me tell you, madam.
This report doesn't show that it's working.
Let me tell you. The Nigerian constitution has already given us a Nigerian democracy. We just have people who are not practicing it. We have citizens who are lazy, who don't hold people to account. And then someone is accusing civil society of not doing what it's supposed to do. But is the media doing what it's supposed to do? No, how is the media?
We in the media, we've been fighting so much for this democracy. And there's no one that can tell me that the price that the media is paying, that others are doing it. Because look at the conversation that we have right now. The president can afford to do some other things, but he knows that he can't face the media. Haven't we been asking why the president has not been holding talks, the media chat with us? Why? And CSOs are not backing us. In a democracy, you are an appointee of the people. You cannot decide to be inclusive just because you go to Aso Rock and then you now form a ring among yourselves. The media will continue this conversation. Our leaders must talk to us and they must be held accountable. We are not in a military autocracy.
Thank you.
And please don't be breaking definitions like this that we are in authoritarian democracy. There's nothing like that. It's either we either practice democracy the way it is or we go back to autocracy. Nothing like authoritarian democracy.
All right, thank you very much.
I just wish I had the privilege of a panelist. That's all I will say.
Thank you very much. I will quickly hand over to Mr. Idowu before it gets too heated. But thank you very much for all your contribution. I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Thank you for excellent job. And I think this shows that we are passionate about our country and we want it to work. Yes. The truth of the matter is, if there is a crack, I'm not sure any West African country can contain us. So we just have to make this work. And stylishly, I have my very good brother and friend here. You know, most times we talk about this civil society, the media. But please don't let us forget the academics. Don't let us forget them. We need to bring them. There was a time that place was a conclave of ideas. But if you look at election at the student union government level now, you will ask ourselves what exactly is going on. Even when you now begin to bring academics even into our elections, some people are already saying, we thought there would be difference, but there is no difference. So, but what I'm just trying to say is that we've talked about the civil society, the media, the academics, we also have to do our part. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your patience. Before I thank, this report is what you have is the abridged version. The report is 277 pages. 277 pages. It's so detailed. Each state have their own detailed findings in terms of the state houses of assembly, budgeting process, local government autonomy. We even went into the aspect of the joint allocation, account DAC. A whole lot is detailed. But what we have now, can we have, I'm already unveiling, can we have the code? We can download it. Yes. So, and it's also on KDI website. You can download it. It's also on KDI website. Because this, if you download this, it just gives you the report immediately. I want to thank you, and then please, before I forget, I know my brother at the back asked for our limitation, the limitation during this study. For time's sake, everything is documented in the report. We also try, as when we were planning this meeting, we also try as much as possible to see how we are not going to make the gathering too academic. But the limitation and everything are right there in the report. And so I want, on behalf of KDI team, I want to thank every one of you. Specifically, let me thank Shein Waladele. She's meant to talk because of time, she couldn't. She led the team of the enumerator in data gathering in KDI, who worked tirelessly on the job. And thank you very much. Again, there is also a dashboard publicly available that you can just go. This is the dashboard. But I think you need to let us know the where people can do that. the dashboard is publicly there for us to see. So I thank you for everybody. You can download the report. We couldn't make available 277-page report for everybody. So, but we can download it, and we hope, it's our hope, that we keep engaging fellow civil society that are here. We can look at this report and pick project ideas on what we can do at various states. I want to thank the DG, Conference of Speaker. Thank you so much for coming. Honorable Speaker, Kano represented, thank you. And the PDI, thank you so much. The DG of People's Democratic Institute, thank you so much for coming. I want to thank everybody. Permit me, we will not be able to mention everybody, but I think we have gotten into another phase that we need to engage with things like this and make Nigeria work. So, once again, thank you very much. Before we leave, tea is served outside. Let's network, let's relate, and thank you so much for coming. God bless you.
Thank you.
National anthem. We still love this country. This time around, let's sing the national anthem ourselves. We are going to sing the national anthem ourselves. All right, national anthem, 1, 2, go. Thank you. God bless you all.